Hello guys, and welcome to a new Steel Division 2 video today by me, Vulcan. In this video I have for you the Battlegroup overview of the 29th Tank Corps. The 29th Tank Corps is one of the few divisions that gets access to the IS-2s, and that is primarily where the power comes from for this division. However, it is backed up by a lot of useful equipment that we'll get into as we head on through. Now the 29th Tank Corps, I think it's probably best built balanced. I reckon you could get away with maybe making a Juggernaut version of this with loads of IS-2s in Phase C. I reckon that'd be quite fun. But in this case, this is a standard sort of 3v3, 4v4 balanced deck that we'll be going through. So in the Recon tab, first of all, we have the Razvedka. I've got these in Phase A and in Phase B. These Razvedka squads, I really like them. They have 7 SVTs, which makes them pretty decent at engaging squads at both close range and medium range, and they can do a decent damage, especially when they are in heavy cover and your opponent is in either light or no cover. And that is where the Razvedka can really shine, because they can ambush units in that situation quite often if you choose to let them do so. Most of the time you might want to keep them on return fire so they don't reveal their position, and then you can try and ambush stuff with the bazooka, which is another reason the Razvedka are really useful. So not only do they have the good stealth and the optics, which helps you spot things, they also have a good fighting capability for 30 points, which is really nice. So yeah, Phase A and B, 3 availability in Phase A and 6 availability in Phase B. The other card that I have is the Su-57 Armoured Recon. This has an M1 gun mounted on the half-track here. It's pretty nice. The best thing about this is its rate of fire, and because it's an open-top vehicle, it does get the extra aim time. And you've got 80 AP shells and 20 HE shells, so this thing can be a monster in support. Now it is a bit of a glass cannon. Although it has like 115mm of penetration and 55% accuracy, which is absolutely fantastic, especially with that rate of fire, its armor is actually very low. So if it takes a shot or two from a tank, it's going to die very quickly. And sometimes 50 points, these can die immediately before getting any kills themselves. But if you manage to pop a Panzer IV, for example, then you've already paid it off. So these can get decent value for money quite easily if you use them correctly. And the way that would be is maybe in light cover, move them in and out, use that rate of fire to your advantage, that kind of thing. You can sometimes, at longer ranges, risk like taking a shot towards you and then getting a second shot in before reversing. And that's often a way you can use them. But get some decent veterancy on them, and these will pay themselves off nicely. Anyway, let's have a look at some of the other units you have access to. Motorcycles, especially for the Soviets, are not worth it because they don't even have radios. But they have had, I believe, a little bit of a buff recently to their optics. They have very high optics now, which makes them more useful for spotting infantry and AT guns in heavy cover, but only at closer ranges. So it's a bit of an awkward trade-off. You never really want them to be within, say, MG range, because they die since they don't have any armor. But yeah, just worth noting that they have been buffed with their optics lately. Now the Dosor squads, these can be good if you can get them in decent transports. So they can come in with the BA-20, and they can also come in with the M3A1 Razvedka. Now the BA-20 would be my recommendation, just because it's an armoured recon unit with a machine gun that can harass units that don't have any AT. The M3A1 can do the same job and slightly more effectively, but it does cost twice as much. So you're paying an extra 10 on top to get a 50 cal, which sometimes for some people is worth it, but personally I do love running around with these BA-20s. For me though, in this case, I prefer to have the Razvedka over the Dosor squads. The Moth Razvedka are very similar in that they can come in with the M3A1 Razvedka, and that is what I would suggest bringing them in with if you were to choose these squads. But low availability in Phase A and B with these mainly because they are forced to come in with 1-star veterancy. It doesn't make them as desirable at all than Resvedka. And Resvedka, these are the ultimate sort of fighting recon units. They have both value as recon and as fighting frontline units. And if they ever get down to like 2 men, I would use a Resvedka squad then as specifically return fire recon. You can get quite a lot of extra Resvedka squads in this particular division, but the last unit is the Valentine 3. Unfortunately, very slow. Its rate of fire is very decent actually. On its AP shell, on its main gun, it's got decent enough penetration that it can kill things like Panzer IVs and half-tracks and anything with like less than, say, 60 armor very efficiently. Because 15 round per minute rate of fire and 40% accuracy is actually quite nice, especially if you give it some veterancy. But just in general, the fact that it's so slow, the fact that the other units have more value, doesn't leave space for Valentines in most battle groups and most divisions. So over to the infantry tab. Now, the first thing we have here is the Saperi. In phase A, the Saperi are very useful to have to get into contesting positions. And what I mean by that is like places near flags where there's heavy cover for most of the time. They have SVTs, they have a DP, so they can do a reasonable amount of damage like the Resvedka squads at medium and close range. But the main reason they're doing damage at close range is because of the TNT here, the 3 HE grenades that they can use to absolutely demolish enemy infantry squads. Now, a common mistake I see people do with these is if you're not on point with your timing running away from enemy HE grenades, you actually cause yourself to take more damage than if you were to just face tank it. Because if you just sit still, you get the entrenchment bonus and you don't take as much damage. Whereas if you try and run away and you're on the move when you take damage, your squad takes more damage. So bear that in mind when you are going one-on-one with these kinds of squads, like Pioneers versus Saperi. But Saperi in general, very versatile squad for the close to mid-range engagements and useful for contesting those points early game. It'd be nice if they could come in a bit of a faster transport, but the M2 is not too bad and it's also armored, which means that they don't automatically get unloaded as easy on the move. I think because these don't have a weapon, they do still auto unload when they take damage or take like morale hits. So bear that in mind, but either way, nice that they come in with half-tracks. Then we have the Strelki DP. Now this is probably one of the better longer range infantry squads for the Soviet side. They have the 9 SVTs and 2 DPs with a PTRD as well. So this is as good as it gets really. And they have the best rifles that the Soviet side can get, as well as 2 machine guns. So that's all good. PTRD is useful for picking off enemy like light armored vehicles or vehicles that don't even have any particular armor. Although you'd probably likely kill them with the machine guns regardless, but the PTRD can just be an extra weapon that's fired at those particular vehicles. So nice to have, simple line infantry that is well worth it. Then I have a card of the Avtos in phase B. Avtos are really, really good at close range. They can be overwhelmed quite easily, but one-on-one Avtos often win. Like they're very good one-on-one against, especially units that don't have any HE grenades. Whereas if you do come up against like 2 flamer units, sometimes Avtos can just be overwhelmed quite easily. So it's very much a balancing act, making sure you know what you're up against, and that will allow you to get the most value out of Avtos. But Avtos can quite often, in a forest environment, get 4 or 5 like infantry squad kills, which is pretty insane if you micro them correctly. Then I've got more Saperi in phase B. This time they're coming in these Studbeckers. I think that's just because we're out of M2s, because M2s are generally better. We aren't actually out of them. That's probably because the overall availability of Saperi has been reduced. So that's actually a little bit of a buff in this case, because it allows you now to bring them in with those spare half-tracks. So that's nice. Yeah, make sure you use up all of the half-tracks in this case, because They are faster off-road than a Studbeka, so you may as well be using them. Then we have, finally, a card of Strauki. You get 27 of these on a card in Phase C, and they only cost 20 points a pop, mainly because their weapons suck compared to the Strauki DP. They use Mozins as opposed to SVTs, and they have one machine gun. They also only have, well, one submachine gun and one machine gun there. They do have this though, the anti-tank grenade. Now this can be actually really useful in certain scenarios, especially when your opponent isn't necessarily paying attention. You could have one of these squads like charge down enemy tanks and stuff, and they're most likely to either one-shot kill or like pin and surrender a tank with one of these grenades, which is really, really good. So sometimes the risk of using a 20-point squad is worth it. So I'd give that a go. Maybe try your lucks if you have the opportunity, but don't just like go out your way to run halfway across the field to do that, because it just won't work. But if you are in close combat environments like in forests and people are using tanks, sometimes you can sneak these close and get those tank kills with them, which is really, really good value for money with a squad like this. But one thing I must say, especially about the 29th Tank Corps, is don't suicide your infantry, because you don't have that much availability. The activation points of the infantry tab cost a lot, so you only have 5 cards in this case. You can see I don't even have any leaders. And so making sure you focus on infantry preservation is quite important, and it's quite amusing considering it's the Soviet side. But yeah, infantry are there to support your tanks, and the tanks are what make you ground in this division. Anyway, other choices, there are Saperi. These guys are the 4-man squads, the PPSH. They have the Panzerfaust. Used to be a lot better. Now, not so much great value for money. You can get a lot of them in the late game now, and you do get 9 on a card for 10 points a pop. But the worst thing about Saperi at the moment is I just don't feel like you necessarily get enough of them to warrant bringing them in as a card. Like, there is a certain amount of looking at a card in Steel Division and working out its overall value. And like the total value of this squad or this card, especially in Phase A, is 90 points. So technically, 1 tick of income in Phase A, you could buy every single one of these. Which can sound good, but ultimately, is that worth, you know, the 125 points worth of Saperi, which are probably going to trade a lot better than a 4-man squad, right? So I would make sure you think about that if you're ever considering bringing squads like these that are exceptionally cheap. Anyway, next up, the Tanko Desanniki. These can come in with the M2A1 half-track if you choose to. They've recently been, I don't know if it's a buff necessarily, but they've been given Molotovs instead of smoke grenades. So they are actually terrifying, like, early game units. And honestly, in this case, it may be better to use them instead of the Saperi if I had the spare half tracks to do so. So if I say take out the Saperi in Phase B, we'll just make this quick adjustment as I've just noticed this. We'll put them into Studbekas. We'll bring in the Tanko Desanniki in M2s then in Phase A. There we go. Cool. So yeah, completely forgot about this change, but these are pretty damn decent close range engagement tools in the early game. They sort of dominate that 100 meters in the early game very well. Just kind of like the Saperi used to with their HE grenade, but now do not. Anyway, the next card is the Avto Komroti. These are okay. I kind of like them because they have 3 submachine guns, so if you forget to put them on return fire, they don't like die. And they also have the smoke for the utility, but they don't get much availability. The 2-star veterancy does like make their radius of command bigger, but in no space in the cards here really to warrant bringing any leaders, as from my opinion. You can get a couple more units of Strauki. You can also get the Strauki Komroti, which are basically very similar to the Avtos. You do get slightly more availability though, so personally I'd recommend bringing these if you wanted leaders at all over the Avtos, quite simply due to availability, and then just remember to put them on return fire if you bring them up, because they're only 3-man squads. They're going to die very quickly if they get spotted. You can get 2 more squads of Avtos if you want, and Superi. You can get another card of these since I took them out of Phase A. Superi Comrotti, probably one of the weakest leaders. They get limited availability, they don't have any utility, not really that useful to have a Panzerfaust on a leader squad. Tanker Comrotti, again, same deal, low availability, use AT, it's just not really worth it. So yeah, best leader squads, always Historic Comrotti in my opinion. Having these smoke grenades is really useful, and also smoke grenades have been buffed, they have 100-meter range now. Okay, over to the tanks. This is what the 29th Tank Corps is all about. You have the 1942 T-34-76s in Phase A here. I've got 6 of them on the card. The availability is lower than the 1943 variants, and usually you get like 8, I think, of the 1943s, but the T-34 76s, 1942s are really nice because they have 90mm of frontal armor, so they're a lot tougher to kill than your standard T-34 1943. They do have decent penetration. The accuracy kind of sucks, like 30% accuracy, but you're going to be either charging enemy forces down, or you're going to be using these against infantry, and therefore accuracy isn't so much of an issue if you're firing a HE shell. But between the HE shells and the machine guns, these are fantastic for destroying infantry and working as infantry support. And other than that, in Phase A, I have 2 cards of the T-34-85 1943s. Now, these are incredibly good. They are really strong in the early game, especially when there's a severe lack of German heavy armor. So if there's only, say, 1 or 2 Tigers that your opponent can bring in, you can overwhelm them with the amount of T-34-85s you can bring in Phase A. And if you know that you want to make a specific push in a certain area, then maybe just buy all of these in at the start. And you can see here that I'm bringing in 2 cards with 1-star veterancy. You only drop 1 tank, you get the extra veterancy, bring in leaders, bring in commander, and you can make them 3-star, which makes them supremely effective. They get the 40% accuracy, 145mm of penetration. Within 500 meters range, you're going to be more or less 100% penetration on the Tiger. So trade 1 for 1 with the Tigers in the early game, and then use the rest to push through wherever you need to go. Like, that's how I would use these T-34-85s in the early game. Also got a pretty nice camo here. Then in Phase B, I have my T-34-85 1944s. Now, the 1944 variants, the only difference is that they have APCR shells. Everything else is exactly the same. These APCR shells, they do have extra accuracy. They've got 10% extra accuracy, but they do have less damage. Now, this is something quite important to know about APCR. APCR shells in general have 1 damage compared to the normal 5 damage, or in this case 7 damage on the AP shell. I always thought they had 5 damage. That's interesting. Anyway, yeah, the AP shell has 7 damage there, so it's likely to do a lot of damage once it penetrates. Whereas an APCR shell, it won't do that much damage when it penetrates, but it's very likely to cause a crit because it has penetrated. So APCR shells are great for disabling the heavier tanks. You can also crit with an APCR shell and get kills, so bear that in mind. But when you're having to deal with heavier units like Tigers from a slightly longer distance, like within the 1000 to 500 meter range, you want to be using APCR versus Panthers and Tigers. Any closer than 500 meters, turn off APCR, because it probably won't make a difference. And then I think beyond 1000 meter range, you may as well be using AP, because APCR falls off faster than AP at that range. So there you go. I would say that's a good sort of rule to go by. I might not be quite exact on the ranges there, but generally good advice. So there we go. That's what the T-34-85s are for. These are supposed to trade 1-for-1 with Panthers and Tigers. That's the way I put it. Anyway, in Phase B, I do bring the card of IS-2 Comrotties. You can only bring them up to Phase B. You can also bring one in Phase A if you chose to, but I'm bringing 2 in Phase B in this case. They have 1-star veterancy, and they provide, obviously, the leader radius to other units nearby. So great for accompanying your other IS-2s in Phase B. Now, IS-2s in general are big, scary beasts. They have the 40% accuracy on their main gun. It used to be 30%, but now it's 40%, and in this case, due to the 1-star veterancy, it's 46% accuracy, so relatively nice. They do kind of struggle to hit things at max range, but they don't really have to be scared about being penetrated either, because they have 160mm of frontal armor. But when it comes to IS-2s and IS-2 1943s, do be careful of things like Nashorns and Pak-43s, because Pak-43s and Nashorns both have very decent accuracy, and with extra veterancy on top of that, they can push to something like 70% accuracy. A Nashorn, I think, can hit nearly 80. So at maximum range, you're going to be outgunned massively, because you're just going to be taking swings and missing, whereas they're going to be getting their direct penetration hits with 230mm of penetration, which is going to go straight through your 160mm of frontal armor. So, as long as you're not up against Pak-43s and Nashorns, also King Tigers, of course, feel free to just run everything else down. But in general, I would say don't get too aggressive with IS-2s, as they are susceptible to people trying to ambush them. You want to have them behind your wall of T-34-85s if you're going to get aggressive, or your wall of infantry, whatever it is. They're great for controlling open ground as long as there's nothing that outguns them, which is not very much, because it's quite limited based on division. So for example, King Tigers can only come in the 21st, the Nashorns can only come in the 78th Sturm. You know, those are the divisions you got to watch out for when using IS-2s, but all the rest you should be able to defeat relatively simply, as long as you're careful with how you face your armor and the placement of the unit. Anyway, in Phase C, we've got more T-34-85 1944s. I'm actually bringing these in at 1-star veterancy, just to lower the availability, but make them a bit more effective in the long run. And then I've got a card of the 1943 IS-2s in Phase C, which actually gives you 6 of them, which is fantastic. Now, if you up the availability, or the veterancy, you lose way too many, so I would recommend against that. Now, other choices in 29th Tank Corps. You do get Valentine Comrotties, but the value for money of this unit is just terrible compared to what else you have to offer, so I'd never really recommend bringing these in. The T-34-85 Comrottie, you can get quite a decent amount of them in Phase C, but you match the IS-2 Comrotties in Phase B, so I don't know why you would ever pick the T-34-85 Comrottie over the IS-2 in Phase B. Now, it's quite a shame, because the ace unit for the 29th Tank Corps is Resheknov? Something like that. Anyway, their ace unit is a T-34-85 Comrottie, but you're unlikely to really ever use it. And then there is 4 more cards of T-34-85 1944s if you want to use that many. You could, in theory, make just a T-34-85 version of the 29th Tank Corps and not really use any IS-2s. But this is also the reason that you could potentially go for a Juggernaut 29th Tank Corps, because you have enough T-34-85s to get you through the early to mid game. And so, you know, in Phase A, you can just bring these in, and in Phase B, you can bring these in and then move all of the cards of IS-2s to Phase C, and that will give you an extra 3. You should have 12 IS-2s to carry you through from the 20-minute mark. Definitely not recommended in 1v1 and 2v2, but something to think about for 3v3, 4v4. Moving into the Sport tab. Sport tab's pretty lackluster, as it is in most sort of armoured divisions, but here we have the 76mm infantry gun. It is basically a terrible version of the OB, and it's good at suppressing enemy support weapons and infantry, but it's going to die very quickly against any form of armor because it just doesn't have heat shells like an OB does. So just be wary of that. It can still kill armor if it hits it enough, but I wouldn't really count on that, honestly. These are coming in at 1-star veterancy because they can be up-vetted nice and easy and don't lose much availability because of that. So there we go. Make sure you're bringing them in with jeeps, get them into position in phase A quicker. Only 30 points a pop. You can get quite a lot of value out of them sometimes. Now, as is the case in most of my divisions now, I have a card of supply in phase A and phase C. I like having supply in phase A in every division because it allows you to fix up tanks. So any divisions that don't have particularly valuable tanks in phase A, you might find that I drop the supply in phase A, but most of them I do have supply in phase A. And then that supply in phase A should generally carry you through to phase C, especially if you're bringing any artillery that comes with supply. In this case, that's not what's happening, but we don't need much supply because our artillery tab is not that big. So yeah, phase A, phase C, 8 supply trucks in total should be enough. Now the 2-man flamer squads can be useful if you bring them in jeeps and also upvet them. This is how I would bring them in if I was going to. You can also get the WC-52 Dushka, but not really worth the money since it's unarmored. So you're paying an extra 10 points for a unit that's going to die quite quickly. It does have a 1,000-meter range on the Dushka, so if you micromanage the range engagement with that machine gun, you can get some value towards like pinning units with it. Which might help you like surrender stuff in the long run, but yeah, just stay away from that, I would recommend, because you get the really nice fast jeep, and these can do a lot of work with the extra veterancy. In this case, I don't have enough space to put them in. Oh yeah, I also have the commander, of course, in phase A. I'm not bringing in the phase B or C commander just because, well, I'm planning to babysit this commander to start with. It should never be in range to be attacked. If it is, then you've forgotten to move it back when the front lines push towards you. But the M2 combat and the BA-20 combat, like phase B and C for starters, but also is pretty lackluster. If this was like a phase C commander that was like an IS-2, that would be kind of cool, but there we go. Anyway, the only other thing to talk about in the support tab is the Maxim, and Maxims are just downright terrible at the moment. They have awful accuracy. They barely do any damage when they hit, and it's as simple as that. So now to the anti-tank tab, we have the M10s. M10s are really cool. They are technically open top, so I think they aim faster, just like other units, like Mardas and stuff. And they have 45% accuracy. I'm bringing them in at 1-star veterancy, so they have the 40 or 51% accuracy, sorry, base accuracy, and then you add an extra 2 veterancy on top of that, and you're getting nearer to 60% accuracy, so that's really nice. So something to consider for sure. I really enjoy using them. You can make like little squads of these, and they can go around and pop Tigers and stuff, because they do have 130mm of penetration, which is actually quite decent, and their front arm is not exactly awful, so they can sort of bounce weaker AT guns whilst engaging the heavier targets with their main guns. So you want to try and outgun your enemy before they hit you for the most part, but they can survive against lighter AP shells. They also have some HE shells, but I don't know, generally this would be a tank that you might even choose to turn off the HE shell so that your attack move commands only target AT or armored units, sorry. But yeah, a nice unit overall, and good value for money in my opinion. Then I have some ZIS-3s in phase A. This is a unit that for so long I really didn't like using, but I found in phase A they kind of have a similar role to like an IG-18, in a sense that they have both AP and HE shells, and their HE shells do 3 damage, so you can do a decent amount of damage to enemy support weapons, and also things, well, infantry squads basically. You can pop tanks with them because they have 105mm of penetration. You're going to be able to get through Panzer IVs very easily. The APCR shells at closer ranges can get through things like Tigers. So use these smart based on the situation you put them in. and they can bring you a lot of value. Maybe consider using them on return fire to make ambushes, but they do only have medium stealth, so they will be spotted a lot easier than, say, a 45mm that has good stealth. But yeah, I like the multi-role purpose of the ZIS-3 in the early game. It works a lot better than it does later on, when you need something more specific based on the situations that occur throughout the game. So speaking of which, well, in Phase B I've got another card of M10s, but I also have 2 cards of these ZIS-2s. I would bring these one of these cards in Phase C probably, if I could, but we can't in this case. The ZIS-2 is really good for dealing with heavier armor, and you might think, why do you have this many ZIS-2s when you have T-34-85s and IS-2s? But the ZIS-2s, they fill a role whereby it's not armor that they don't have armor, right? And that's important. Like, that's a good thing. They use strength instead. So tanks actually find it quite hard to kill these quickly, and you can take advantage of that in order to, like, swing engagements, especially armored engagements, in your favor. If you have like a wall of like ZIS-2s, or not necessarily a wall, but say like 2 or 3 behind a T-34-85 push, it can really like stop your opponent from pushing back onto you. Say if you lost a T-34-85 or 2, that they're going to be apprehensive to counter push, even if they have the numbers, because your ZIS-2s will be there and be quite difficult to take care of unless they have their like artillery on point. And the APCR shells can be really useful for breaking through the front armor of things like Panthers, and I think they're also relatively decent at taking care of King Tigers at closer ranges, say within 500 meters. The APCR shells can actually get quite a lot of penetration, I think. But their standard AP shells, it's okay. It's 120 mils of penetration. It's actually not that much more than a ZIS-3. But it does obviously benefit from the closer it gets, the more penetration it has. And it does have a base accuracy of 50%, which is nice as well. Decent rate of fire as well at 12 rounds per minute is pretty damn nasty, especially in the right position. So these are quite situational, but can get you a lot of value. And if you place these like around an open area, you can find very nasty side shots. They also have medium stealth, similar to a ZIS-3. They can get spotted quite easily, but I've generally seen, it generally seems like ZIS-2s don't get spotted as much as ZIS-2s don't get spotted as much as ZIS-3s, in my opinion. But I don't know if that's just a subjective thing, but anyway, either way. The other options in the anti-tank tab are the PTRS-41, which is just not really a good value for money unit. Similar to what I was saying about the Superdi PPSH, 10-man squads, you get 6 of them, that's a 60-point card. Like, why would you put that in your division? I don't know. To me, not worth the activation points ever. 45 mils, consider bringing these instead of a ZIS-3 if that's your preference. I've been trying out the ZIS-3 lately and it's been going okay for me, but the nice thing about this anti-tank gun is it does have better rate of fire and than the ZIS-3, that is, not than the ZIS-2. And its APCR is okay. Obviously not as good as a ZIS-3. But yeah, it's just good rate of fire, cheap, and gets the job done in the early game. You get 6 of them at 1-star veterancy, so you can push their base low accuracy up a little bit. Anyway, the only other unit you have choice of getting is the Su-85. This has 8 APCR shells with 180mm of penetration, which is really useful for taking on most German armor, honestly. But you got to manage the range engagement, and the rate of fire is lousy at 5 rounds per minute rate of fire. Like, that is pretty damn terrible. So you want to make sure you're microing these properly. Move forwards, take your shot, move back. You're going to be wanting to use them from light cover if you bring them in, but in this case I'd rather use the other units at my disposal. That the M10 has way more value for money, in my opinion, than an Su-85 in this case. Right, on to anti-air. Anti-air is pretty simple. We have the 37mm AA, which just trumps anything else you have in the anti-air tab. In this case, I am actually bringing both of them in the M2A1 half tracks with the 50 cals. And that's mainly so that if they start to get artied, I can pick them up again and move them, because you only have 6 AA pieces. So that's pretty important. You can, of course, just dump your 37mm and drive forwards with the M2A1 half track to support your infantry if you want to, but the main reason they come in with half tracks with weapons on them in this case is so that I can move them about wherever I need. Well, mainly to save them, not necessarily to proactively move them. Unless, say, I leave one behind and I can shift it forwards to support my tank push or something. But yeah. Anyway, 37mm. It's a decent AA piece. Give it some veterancy as well, and you'll find 2 or 3 of these will easily shoot down most enemy aircraft by the time they get out. They won't necessarily stop any strikes, but there's nothing you have here in the anti-air tab that's going to prevent a strike from happening in the first place. You just got to hope that your 37mm land the shots as they fly away and shoot down those aircraft so they can't come back in the future. Other choices here are the Dushka trucks and the Maxim 4M. I think you might be able to bring in these, yeah, in Dushka trucks. Like, you can bring in the 37mm in the Dushka trucks, but the Dushka trucks just aren't that good, so there we go. I'd much rather just have the armor on the M2A1 and use that as a ground support vehicle, as opposed to having an anti-air that's really not that good. So there we go. Yeah, not much else to talk about. Maxim 4M, very, very lackluster. If you have a lot of these underneath an aircraft and it flies right over the top, yeah, you can kill them quite quickly, but yeah, just bear that in mind. It's not really that good. Right, onto artillery. There's not really much to talk about in the artillery tab. I have, first of all, the motorcycle mortars. They're coming in at 1-star veterancy. I've actually started to favour the motorcycle mortars now over the standard 82mm mortar infantry, because counter battery order is a thing. And so generally nowadays, like, people will go for that counter battery straight away, but if you have motorcycles, you can get out the way of the enemy's fire once you fired yourself. So you basically do an order, like you give a fire position order, you hold shift, you give a move order to somewhere away from where your current bikes are, and then as soon as they finish their barrage, they will move away, and they will do so very quickly. So yeah, it's nice to have them so they can do that. Of course, you can do that with infantry. It's just infantry mortars, and they move a lot slower, right? So that's something to consider. Anyway, in the artillery tab, I do have a card of VZ-VOD UPR in Phase B, and these are coming in with half tracks. The main reason I have the VZ-VOD here is because we don't have any leaders in the infantry tab. So we're making up for that in the artillery tab, where we can get 6 on a card in Phase B, which is quite nice. And then also 10-man infantry infantry leader squads, so that's good stuff. Now also in Phase B, we have the Katyusha. Now these are pretty important because these are what allow you to break down strong enemy defense, especially say if you're using the 29th Tank Corps against something like the 5th Panzer, which is quite a sizable like Panzer division, or something like the 116th. Katyushas allow you to basically pin enemy tanks and enemy emplacements, or not necessarily emplacements, but support weapons, so things like PaK-40s, AT guns. And so the Katyushas, you will probably need both of them to pin down a Tiger or a Panther, like in the same area. So that's something to consider. But the great thing about Katyushas is they sort of, you use them just before you push, and they will make sure that the enemy is panicked before you move in. They'll be a lot less effective than you will. That's the main idea behind bringing these in B. And then there is the 120mm mortars. The 120mm are probably the best artillery you can get, or the high, not necessarily the best, but the highest caliber artillery you can get in the 29th Tank Corps. And the way you would use these is probably just making sure you have all of them at the same time before using them, or at least 3 of them, maybe with a leader next to them, in order to increase their rate of fire and lower their dispersion slightly. But yeah, the 120mm mortars used en masse can be very, very nice. to just more or less pin things down. They don't have much lethality. The 82mm mortars generally kill things faster than 120mm mortars do, but 120mm mortars certainly pin things down faster. And that's what you need them for, because the whole idea of your artillery tab in this case is to support your armored pushes. So there we go. Anyway, other choices in the artillery tab are the WC-52. These are interesting because you get quite a lot of them. You can get 2 in phase A, 4 in phase B, 6 in phase C. And they are off map. But that off map is 76mm off map. Now, I haven't really had a chance to try these, but in theory, if you brought in 6 in phase C for 40 points a pop, and then used them all with like emergency, you could definitely saturate a huge area for quite a while. It may be worth a try, guys, but in my case, I'm sticking with what I know. Then there's the F-22s. F-22s can be nice because you can get a lot of them. They aren't particularly accurate, so they kind of have the same effect as what I was just talking about with that off map, where you can kind of pin a large area, and then if they hit anything directly, they will still do a little bit of damage, but really not the most reliable artillery in the world. And personally, I think they're a bit expensive for what they offer. So yeah, be careful using these. Then the other choices are just like extra mortars if you want them. Right, into the air tab. Now, the air tab's kind of interesting. You get quite unique aircraft here in phase A, the A-20ZH Zhuchok. This has 4 guns on the front. These are all 20mm, and it's also got 4 50 cals as well. I think these are the 50 cals on the front, and I think the 20mm are underneath. And it's also got its turret-mounted machine guns as well. But this is like the ultimate strafing aircraft. It's not as good as it once was because 50 cals have been toned down quite a bit, so the 4 50 cals on the front aren't as good as they once were. But either way, they are... Actually, no, those are the nose guns. The 20mm are the nose guns. The 50 cal ventrals are underneath. Yeah, sorry about that. It literally says right there, nose. But yeah, they're not as good as they once were. But they will still help you pin down tanks. Just not as quickly. I think they probably need 2 passes now, whereas, like, say on like a heavy tank like a Tiger or a Panther, I think they need 2 passes, whereas previously they only need 1 pass, which is quite a big difference, honestly, because it's the difference between like somebody being able to react with a fighter, for example. So yeah, fantastic for destroying support weapons, AT guns, infantry guns, all that kind of stuff. And also just like mortars if you spot them, or enemy artillery. You know, if you get a chance to strafe them with these, it will likely kill them. So yeah, they have their uses, and I like playing around with them. But if you don't want to bring the Zhuchok, just bring more A-20C Bostons, because A-20C Bostons, pretty damn good. In phase A, I also have a card of the P-39Q-15 Cobras. These are actually pretty deadly aircraft. They will do a lot of damage in the air to enemy fighters, but bear in mind they are relatively fragile. They have bad resilience, and like the A-20C Boston has very good resilience, for example. So yeah, these will get shot down by a couple of AA pieces. You don't want to be fighting over enemy AA. That's basically what I'm trying to say. But they will likely win an air engagement, like either a neutral or over your territory. And you can bring quite a lot of these in phase B if you choose to. In this case, I think 3 is enough, so I'm bringing them in phase A. Gives me a chance to support my early tank pushes if needs be. And in phase B, I do have a card of the Bostons. Got 3 of these with the 500kg bombs, just to kind of dislodge enemy tanks and give me the advantage in tank engagements, as well as cleaning out enemy support weapons. Other things in the air tab include the PO2 recon aircraft, which is, I mean, they're okay and they can be useful, but only if the enemy doesn't have any AA, which doesn't last very long. So there's something you'd use at the start of the game, and then the card becomes useless. So not a massive fan of that, if I'm honest. Then there's the A20C Bostons with a lot of bombs. These guys have 16 50 kilogram bombs and an extra 4 50 kilogram bombs there, so 20 in total. They're basically carpet bombers. You can't really get that many more than, say, your standard bomber variants, the ones with the 500 kilogram bombs. So I would stick to the 500 kilogram bomb variants over the 50 kilogram bomb variants. And if you want something with a bit more power, then feel free to bring in the 1000 kilogram bomb. But the 1000 kilogram bomb, I just don't find it pins things as well as multiple 500 kilogram bombs. So this is technically 1500 kilograms worth of bombs, and this is just 1000. So there you go. That's the difference there. And I think it's always worth paying that a little bit more just to get a bigger payload on a bomber. Other choices are the LA5Ns. LA5Ns can be very nice because they're super fast, but I find the fact that they've only got two 20mm in the nose makes them pretty awful at strafing and not as effective as a Cobra in dogfights. But they are very fast and they do often like out dogfight other units. So I don't know. I just prefer the firepower on the Cobra because you can strafe with them as well if needs be, whereas the LA5N you can't. So that's why I prioritize the Cobra in this case. And that's it. That's your lot. That's the 29th Tank Corps. The whole idea of this division is quite simply to support your tanks in making concerted pushes. So you want to be bringing in initially your T-34 1942s and the T-34 1943, like T-34-85s that is, and utilizing them to make like a spearhead, which can then be filled out by the IS-2s while supporting them with your mortars and your aircraft. And you can see that I'm more or less going for like a phase A to phase B push, which is actually something that's quite commonly done in 1v1 and 2v2. A lot of people, I think, competitively build this Maverick because like the push from A to B is like so important with the ISs. But in this case, it's more shifted to the late game because of the 3v3 and 4v4 games that I play more often. So that's basically the play style of the division. And yeah, hopefully this has been relatively insightful. It's been quite a long one, but there was quite a lot to go over, especially in concern of the new update, which is why I've kind of been holding off on doing Battlegroup overviews lately. But yeah, we will have more of these on the channel to come, and I will continue going through them in order until I have at least one Battlegroup overview done for each division. So yeah, we'll get there eventually, but that's it for now. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.